So we're going to kick off with a panel which is looking at a topic which we have covered before, and it always creates a thorny discussion, and that is the topic of data sovereignty and governance. How do you put data sovereignty, or how do you make sure your data is properly classified? How do you comply with data governance rules and data sovereignty rules in projects? So joining me, I'll be moderating this panel. Joining me will be Khaled Al-Sulaimi, Cybersecurity GRC Director, Red Sea Global and AMAALA. Engineer Majed Tamer Aljendy, Chief Control Officer, Saudi Binladen Group. Richard Deeb, Smart City Manager for the Royal Commission of Al-Ula. Joining us on Zoom will be Sherief Elabd, Director of Industry Strategy and Innovation at Oracle Construction and Engineering. So please welcome everybody to the stage. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming back. Like I said, so this track will look at data and digital transformation. And we've had many discussions in the past around sovereignty of data, governance of data, and that's what we really want to explore in our panel discussion now. So I'm going to start by asking Sherief, who's joining us digitally, a question. So Sherief, when looking at Saudi Arabia, there's a mandate on data presence in the kingdom. What does this mean for organizations working with international contractors? And by that, I mean, for instance, when you're trying to use tools where you're trying to collaborate, but you're based in different regions, different countries, etc.
Tuning in today. Well, I think before I answer this question, we need to understand what it means data governance and data sovereignty, because these are two different things. What it means for organizations from governance perspective is making sure that all project stakeholders are on an automated or a digital platform against whatever the project controls or the project management information system that they are using, and everyone is secure, everyone is privilege-based and accessing these functionalities based on a certain security and administration metrics, and that all stakeholders have that fair access of the data depending on their responsibilities in the projects. And this is what we're calling the governance on the data. And there is a part related to the governance, which is the accountability, making sure that everyone is being collaborative within that particular system and they share responsibilities against workflows and stage gates within the projects. This is where you're making people accountable, because if this is a kind of a communication over email, import, export, as such we see in some organizations of Excel and Word, we're not maintaining accountability on the data. So the first point is you gotta make sure that all project stakeholders are part of that particular platform, be it project controls, be it an extended PMIS system, and that everyone is participating in their workflows. The next step is the security of the data, or the data residency. And when we speak about this, we have to differentiate between two things. There is data residency and there is data processing, because some of the software vendors, they host the data in country, which is really important for any organization, be it project owner, general contractor, collaborating with subcontractors, and there is processing of the data. And we see some of the software vendors, they do this from external servers. Making sure that the data reside within the country, it means that you're ticking all the boxes against the IT compliance and governance that is set forth by the country itself. And we have many examples within the kingdom where Oracle is making sure that all the products and all the data are in compliance with each organization We have a lot of companies within the public investment fund and government sector that are hosting their data in their project management systems within the country. I think also the mandate is extending into other areas that we haven't used to, which is the building information modeling. And we've heard this from a couple of organizations in the kingdom where they want to bring in the models into a work in progress mode across all the collaborators, but still within the kingdom itself.
Okay, thank you. So, Khaled, if I turn to you now, if you are at that point where you're trying to put a data strategy in place, you want to set out the rules, want to make sure that governance is strong, ensure that sovereignty rules are complied with. How do you start that process? How do you make sure that you've given the process structure and that people understand what's expected of them?
Thank you, Rob. Well, traditionally speaking, for setting up a data strategy, the regulations primarily by the National Cybersecurity Authority and the National Data Management Office would be a traditional first step. But on their own, it's only a regulation that is on a piece of paper or a digital document. I would say the single most important thing that follows that would be to get the executive management sponsorship through consistent awareness, having multiple sessions with them, and having them understand the value and importance of that, not only because it's a regulation, but because it's gonna add value to the company. Once you have that in place, it's gonna cascade also to all the N-1, and then from there you can get started with the frameworks, the policies, the procedures, and then all the stakeholders within the company are gonna be in a way or another reporting to one of those people that are already having you already have the buy-in of those people. As a next step, I would say having a governance, a management committee for the data governance, where there is a meeting on a weekly, monthly. At first, it needs to be more frequent, and then it goes as the program progresses. But definitely, the sponsorship of the senior management or the executive management is the starting point for that.
And having somebody in place who really understands the rules. Because I ask this because actually it's caused, when we've talked about data sovereignty in the past at CTF, and obviously this has mainly been in the UAE, but the conversation has gone around, do people clearly understand the sovereignty rules? Does that cause confusion sometimes, which can maybe mean people are unsure what they can and can't do?
It does indeed cause confusion, and sometimes they do not truly get what it's all about. But that's where the role of the consistent messaging, the awareness, the workshops, or having working groups with all the relevant stakeholders is necessary to clarify any of those. And it's never a one-time thing, and then you expect everyone to understand and start working with you.
Yeah, I can see that that's something that you do need to continually build on.
Of course.
Majed, turning to you, how do you go about ensuring that data has been correctly segregated and classified? That to me sounds like it could be a very big task that could be more complicated perhaps than people give credence to.
First of all, I'm really thankful for having us here in this wonderful event. It's really aspiring. Thanks, Rob, for inviting us also for this really hard talk about data sovereignty. Being in an ABC contractor, I do believe that it is one of the most difficult tasks actually is to deal with data and to deal with different stakeholders when we are mapping the data. When we talk about segregating the data or classifying the data, it all depends on the strategy of the data sovereignty that you do have. And frankly speaking, there is no right fit for all for such a strategy, because when we work with different clients, when we work with different projects, each one has its own specific requirements. And just to be a little bit more specific and practical, for example, we're working now with Red Sea, with our colleagues here in Khalid and his team, and the data requirements in terms of the design detailing and the classification of the design and the quality of how to handle this data is totally different than working in a project like Holy Haram in Mecca, for example, where we're working in a total different environment where multiple stakeholders are there and the data sharing is way more restricted. So developing this strategy is actually what will get the people to learn how to deal with each type of the data. And being a contractor, again, you have to deal with clients, you have to deal with subcontractors, you have to deal with vendors, and you have to deal with your management, and you have to deal with your site engineers. So each tier of this of management has the privilege of seeing certain data or dealing with certain data. When you look really into the technology part of the story, and when we are now approaching more of a cloud-based environment, and really it's not so much different whether you're hosting your own data, as our colleague in the Zoom were saying, or you're going with full BIM with full cloud, or you're going with a hybrid cloud, whether you're using the cloud to its best as a software, or you're just using it as an infrastructure. It all depends on the strategy. It all depends on how you classify different types of data and how you train people to do that classification.
What about the how part of that, in terms of how do you classify that data? What knowledge is needed to make sure that it's classified correctly?
When we're dealing with different types of data, if we're talking about design, for example, or BIM models, or drawings, or specifications, certain specifications, you really need to make the right governance in place. For example, if we are getting a design that is developed by our client, and you still need yet to develop it further to make it constructible. So sometimes the selection of the vendor, sometimes the selection of the material is quite classified. Sometimes you just need to educate whoever is receiving the data from the third party, whether it's he's storing it locally or via the cloud. It doesn't matter really. He needs to be aware of the type of the data. Is it commercially sensitive? Is it sometimes politically sensitive? Is it can it be shared with vendors immediately? What sort of tips or what sort of tagging you need to add to each part of this data? So we really train the people on how to deal with it and how to give it the right tag for it to be stored in the right place with the right privilege.
Okay, so Richard, now AMAALA is, you have a data governance project underway, which is the smart data codes. I guess the easiest thing for me to ask you is, what is it? How will it be used? What does it mean for all the people that are working with you?
First, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Thank you for the invitation. So to answer your question, I would like to just step one step back and explain a little bit smart city journey, how we're fulfilling it as per the strategy. So the smart city journey started by what we call a smart city detailed design program. In a nutshell, this program aimed to paint or design a blueprint architecture of the smart county platform. It has several streams. The first streams were different techniques of identifying where are the use cases, whether getting them from the master plans or through ideation process like design thinking workshops, or through benchmarking exercise against 20 cities. All this resulted with a pool of use cases. Now, one of the streams next came with mapping all the technical component to each of these use cases so that the blueprint architecture is built with a heavy focus when it comes to the IoT world or the field services. In a nutshell, this has resulted to building two major components, we call them enablers. The first one is the Smart County platform. In a nutshell, we can say it is a big data platform where data can land and we can apply a certain governance on top of it to allow many stakeholders to consume this asset or these data sets. And the second is the digital twin component, which allow an enhanced version with the 3D capabilities, simulation, and so forth. So in a nutshell, these two components, we can imagine them. One is fulfilling a system of record of real-time data, and the other one is a system of record for development data, development and construction data. Now, in parallel, while building these technical capabilities, we've initiated what we call on a regulatory front. And we have launched two projects, one which is called the Smart City Codes, and the second one, Smart Data Codes. So the Smart City Code it addresses or it sets all the policies, the guidelines, even principles around how to use the technology within the county of AMAALA. And the second one, the Data Codes, is really a focus from what are the guidelines, principles, policies, and even going up to the code of practice perspective, how to handle the data, how to classify the data, how to share the data, etc. So by completing these two tasks that are in parallel, one on a technology front, we're fulfilling what we call an enabler role from a government entity, and the second part is fulfilling the regulation part. And building on the answer, on the comment that was mentioned just previously, is I believe data literacy is a very important point, and one way of making sure the data governance it cascades down within the organization. This is meaning lessons learned from the Dubai case, but also this is something that we're implementing in AMAALA, is to identify data champions. These data champions are ambassadors that need to be trained, of course, need to be up to the level from a literacy perspective when it comes to data, but these are the representative within the organization or each department to make sure that data is governed and data management is happening correctly as per the data strategy.
And I think what's interesting with what you're saying there is, I've had a number of people actually who, when I've talked about this, who've said exactly the same. Find your data champion, because it's not just that they make your life easier, but they will bring along the people who are the interested but not quite sure, and will also start to work on the people who are maybe a bit resistant to that change. So it brings that through. So that's clearly something that more and more companies are doing now. Yeah. Okay. So Sherief, going back to you, and I mean, I know that one of the things I wanted to ask you about was disaster recovery and what kind of provisions are being put in place. Because again, I'm guessing that similar rules must comply when you're looking at disaster recovery. But something else I want to ask you about is, listening to what has just been said, it got me thinking, are the people in charge of managing the systems going to be spending more and more of their budget on the data aspect in the coming years, in your opinion? I possibly shouldn't ask Oracle that question, but, you know.
Actually, a good question, Ron, because not really. So by you securing your software as a service doesn't mean that you're spending more, and by you having a disaster recovery, to your point, doesn't mean that you're spending more. So I have not seen any organization that we've dealt with that they found after their ROI that there is more spending when it comes to OpEx related to the data sovereignty or securing the data. Possibly there is one element where you need to spend on the data in that. If we're considering, for example, hosting some on-premise related software products or probably some third-party solutions on one server. So imagine you have a PMIS system from X vendor, be it Oracle or just any other vendor, but you're using 4 or 5 other project management systems or tools that they complement the PMIS, which is pretty typical everywhere. And as one of the rules that you have within the organization is that you want to consolidate and unify the SaaS experience or the data center experience. So that organization has decided to bring in these 4 or 5 other project management tools into Oracle Data Center or just any other data center. So there is a spending because you got to host these things on extensions that we're calling as PaaS or platform as a service or infrastructure as a service. So probably this is one of the spending points. Back to the disaster recovery. I think we need to well define what is a disaster recovery, because if we're saying, hey, I am using a software XYZ on your data center and what I need is frequent, automated, scheduled backups of my data, that's not a disaster recovery. That's something that you take from almost every single software vendor in the market as part of your subscription. Disaster recovery is the organizational way of planning to resume your business operations that may follow an unexpected event. And that event might entirely damage or destroy the data or the software itself. So that's what we're calling a disaster recovery. To the point for what Oracle is doing, we've been expanding dramatically our operations in terms of OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. That's the name of our data center across the world. And specifically in the Middle East, we're doing a great job. And from disaster recovery perspective, again, we've been hearing almost from every single government and public sector, especially in the kingdom, that towards the end of 2023, that's going to become a mandate to reside in country, so in Saudi Arabia. And we're certainly making a lot of forward steps in order to accomplish that goal. That means that you're getting 100% cloud experience in country, not only for data, not only for processing of the data, but also from disaster recovery perspective.
Okay. Richard, I want to ask you about, I'd like to get some, if you've got any examples of successful approaches you've taken to data governance, but the comments there that were being made by Sherief actually, are you also looking at technologies such as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service? Do you think that more and more is going to become as a service, and then you start to focus on the bits where you can really add value and everything else you push outwards?
So yes, exactly. We're living into what we call the cloud era, where everything is as a service. And the idea is businesses or organizations will focus on their core value and their core values. So I'm fully aligned with the comment that has been provided. So rather than wasting the time on the technology, is rather now we have the technology as a service, and then we will focus on the fact of how to handle the data, how to process it, what are the insights that came up. And for example, as a government organization should be, again, the two main roles of a government organization would be to focus on regulation and enablement. So from a regulation perspective, it can be data-driven decisions or data-driven policies.
Okay, and I mean, Khaled, I guess a similar question in terms of, are you going as a service, but also then how are you working with your partners as well to make sure that they are up to speed? Because everybody must be in such different places in terms of preparedness.
Indeed, I mean, it's the new reality that everything is going on cloud, and there is simply no easy way of doing this or a secret recipe to achieving this. So it takes time, dedication, and persistence to be able to achieve that. However, we're truly embracing an enabler role when it comes to our role within the organization as cybersecurity and data governance, in working with all the stakeholders, some of whom are already here in the audience. I believe it's a natural tendency for humans, really, that they resist anything that is coming from an authoritative or a control function, which cybersecurity data governance actually is. So there is that level of resistance at first, but then having a business-first mindset and working as an enabler and showing them that in reality and living that value, you will realize that over time, those people, and going back to the point mentioned earlier, naturally become your champions, even if they're not necessarily assigned as such in a formal capacity. But those champions start delivering that kind of data governance when they in turn work with the contractors or with any external stakeholders. Now that's a great way of ensuring that it gets done with the contractors, but you can't just rely on that. So on the other hand, we also have like early engagements whenever there is any contract with or any deal with a contractor from the early stages, and then during the implementation of whatever the project may be, and then if there is an exit or anything like that. So throughout all of this, there is a periodic assessment that we perform, because contractually speaking, all the requirements that will achieve that data sovereignty and data governance are there. But we need to have verification and frequent check-ins to ensure that those controls are actually in place. And finally, to complement that, there is also different types and ways of monitoring that we do online, dark web, just to ensure that there is no breach or data leakage that may happen, and that goes against those agreements that we have with the contractors.
Okay, and then I'll come to you in a moment. Before I do we have any questions? If you do, if you could put your hand up so that we can get the microphone to you. And whilst that's happening, Majed, again, I guess for Saudi Binladen Group, also moving as a service to much of it, and looking at training, how are you making sure that, because you must be working with so many different people within your supply chain, how do you make sure that that's all in place?
That's a very good question. Allow me to reflect on 2 points mentioned by my colleagues first. First of all, definitely it's a winning trade-off to go as service for us as a contractor. However, as a contractor, we are in the most challenging position where we have to be really flexible. And in order to be really flexible to fit out with different clients' requirements, it all comes to training. Because no matter what sort of strategy you develop, no matter what sort of policies and procedures you set in place, you always have to cater it for different clients and different projects. So what we did actually, again, I'm reflecting on what's mentioned by my colleague, we've assigned a champion for each department. We have a champion for engineering, a champion for project controls, champion for tendering and estimation, champion for supply chain, and each champion is doing what we call the stewardship of data. He's handling it, he knows how to do it, and we're expanding these teams. The target now is what we did it in one pilot project. Actually, all users of the service now are stewards of data. So you really don't need to go through any layer. For example, if an engineer is producing a drawing or a model, or a planner is developing a schedule, a Primavera file or whatever, he can himself know how to tag it, what sort of codes he needs to apply to it, how to segregate between final document and draft document, who's the owner of the data, what's the life cycle of the data. definitely you don't want to end up with piling obsolete documents, just putting it, and it's consuming all of your space and your mobility. A small challenge that I would like to draw here is the need of mobility, because the majority of the projects that we are constructing now in Saudi Arabia are green fields, you know. So you really need to have this mobility in place. So if you are mobilizing resources across the projects, you cannot always depend. In this champions phase has to phase out, where actually everybody is now educated enough and trained enough to deal with different sort of data. So wherever you're relocating your resources, you have some sort of consistency across your projects.
Okay. Do we have any questions? We've got time for one question from the audience. Any questions? I think you've explained everything very well. So do you have any final comments then on just what people need to think about in terms of making sure they have their data strategy in place and are developing it? Just very brief, any comments, any of you?
If I may, yeah, I would start first. So yes, we've discussed a lot about data governance. I think there is another challenge that will be, and it's down the road through the maturity, is, okay, we're setting the right governance to collect data, and now we want to process it. And one of the main challenges that we lived and we experienced back in Dubai, and this is something that we're already tackling in AMAALA region, is how to build the right team that will be assessing this data. We say about data science team, but in fact, it's not just a combination of just data scientists. It should be a combination of multiple roles. So that we have data engineers, of course, data science, but also a product manager, a UI, UX designer, all these combination, a project manager, to be able to achieve the development of a product, of a data product, and shifting the mindset from developing a use case to a data product. So this is something that definitely will come as the organization evolve on a data maturity level.
Okay, thank you. I'll tell you what, let's close the panel. I'll let you ask your question, but Sherief, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you being with us. Could you, because you can ask your question while we get the next person ready on Zoom. So.
Okay. So my name is Mohammed Hijazi from Saudi Constructioneers. Regarding data governance, is there some sort of standard that you would base upon, a good practice standard for labeling, for tagging, for different aspects of the governance for data sovereignty?
Either of you? Any of you?
Actually, it's a very good question. Regarding the tagging of each certain document, usually when we train people, we educate them about the type of the data, the type of the file, the type of the document, the life cycle of the document, the user of the document, the owner of the document, the one who's responsible to maintain the document, because document is not a stagnant thing. It goes through a life cycle. And the internal documents, the circulation across departments, if it's to be submitted or shared externally, if it has a classification regarding the security classification or confidentiality classification, or it's a public document. The most important is to have all of these attributes, and to keep the versioning is a very important thing. One small challenge in regard of that, when you deal with a document that is shared with different departments. For example, if you are developing a BIM model, the mechanical department is participating, the electrical department is participating, structure is the same. The planner is assigning the timeline, the QS is assigning the quantities. So you're dealing with a document that multiple people is using actually, and each one has his own attributes to code it or tag it. So here comes the training part, where all of these users are familiar with the document, with nature, and what are the attributes that they really need to maintain.
Okay.
Hope I answered the question.
Brief answer, if possible, please.
Sure. So, great explanation there. If I may just add one point here. I believe a great misconception that I see all the time is the data governance or the cybersecurity team being responsible for classifying the data, where in fact it's the champions at the different departments who are the owners of that data that know the most, more than anyone else, who should be able to classify it. Of course, with the direction and with the guidelines that was mentioned on how to classify it accordingly, but it should be coming from the owners of the data, and cybersecurity or data governance should have a guiding role in that cycle.
Wonderful, thank you. So thank you very much. Thank you to our panel, please. And
thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.